We are asking tonight is how far does the right to picket go? Because there have been deaths, injuries, destruction of property. And what is the role and responsibility of the state? And what is the sole responsibility of the police during protest? Speaking with me right now on set is, right next to me is Kipchumba Nyorsok, an advocate.
Yes. So
good evening, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And Elijah RUTO, human rights advocate at KNCHR.
Thank you very much for having me here.
And welcome, gentlemen,
Thank
to the workers. You're looking sharp.
Thanks so much.
And did you have any trouble making it to the studio? You know, it's day 2 of the demonstrations. Normalcy is neither here nor there.
Not quite as much, but as we could see, the normal day-to-day activities of Nairobi town was a little bit limited, but a little bit much improved compared to yesterday.
Right.
So coming to these studios, I did not have any challenges coming from town, but there's a lot of tension, and you can sense it from the environment.
Right.
Yes.
And how was it for you, RUTO?
To me, I would say it is more in the mind to know that you're moving around and the fact that you are not sure of what you may encounter on your way to this studio, and possibly also on your way back, because anything can happen, and we've seen in other places where there had been barricades of the road. But so far, yes, it has been safe, and there's good movement of flow of traffic.
Right. And before we get even into anything constitutional, let's talk about the role of social media, because it has been very instrumental, especially during this time. Sometimes causing some little bit of panic, but sometimes again just to let you know where you can avoid what is happening exactly for you, so you can just be on the bit.
Yeah, the role of social media is very, very important, and it has really awoken the society. People are able to get information. People are able to know what is going on within the spectrum of which they operate. So it is really very interesting, but also at some point it instills fear to people, because people, the media, as they say, will only most probably focus on the negatives and not the positives. So the impact of social media as Facebook, Instagram help people to know what is going on when people are going to their daily activities during the day. And I can say it is awakening because people know what is going on in a very, very short period of time.
Right.
Just a click of a button, you can know, you can search, you can know how traffic is flowing from certain places as you interact, as you go to your day-to-day daily activities. So I can say it is playing a very, very, very major role.
Right.
And we cannot underestimate the power of social media.
Okay,
Yes.
and RUTO, then how do you demystify, how do you discern that this is truthful information, this is malice, this is propaganda?
Yes, just to pick up from where he left off, I think social media has been a very important tool in terms of making it easier and accessible for a majority of Kenyans who have telephones that have internet access. And with that then comes an influx of information and also misinformation.
Right.
Now, how to decipher or to know which one is verifiable or not will depend on the individual themselves, on what their perceptions and biases are, because nowadays you see social media, persons post information targeting a specific audience. And it's important that we start looking at information from a verified perspective. For example, when I see a Twitter or a message that has been posted by Lookuptv,
right,
then I would know that that is credible information, because I know that the people who are working around the station have done their due diligence and they at least know. So in some spaces we have seen, again, with verification of identities in social media, then it also enhances the credibility, despite the fact that nowadays with a little bit of money you can be able to verify yourself, even with a Hawks account. But then it gives us the opportunity to now interrogate further and hold on to try and see whether is this information credible or not. We have seen people post old videos
Right.
to try and take advantage of either a hashtag that is running or something that is trending at the moment. And through that, people have always been able to call them out instantaneously, and it has enabled the public to see, hey, wait a minute. And so we've seen many being branded as fake, while others as verifiable. There are also some authorities within the country, for example, government officers who, when they send out information through social media and either tag news stations and so on, then such information can be viewed as credible. But then it will all boil down to the individual and what are their perceptions are towards the information that they are consuming.
Right. And now let's talk about the demonstrations. This is the third wave of the Azimio anti-government protest, and day 2 of the 3-day, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday days that demonstrations will be taking place. And as of this evening, Embakasi East Member of Parliament Babu Owino, alongside another aide of the Azimio affiliated, were charged in court, of course, for planning chaos.
Yeah.
Those are the charges right there. And I want us to talk briefly about arrests.
Yeah.
How arrests were made. You know, he has appeared in court more than 24 hours after he was arrested. There was no clarity where he was being held. So just take us through what needs to happen when someone is arrested.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have a very robust constitution. In fact, it has been termed as a transformative constitution by the fact that under Article 49, that's Chapter 4, Bill of Rights, it provides for the rights of an arrested person. Normally, what should be done is that once you've been arrested, the law requires that the arresting person should endeavor to make sure that that person is presented before a court of law within reasonable time, and normally within 24 hours, and if it does not fall within a normal working day, a very reasonable time that follows now following the day that that person has been arrested.
Right. So
constitutionally, the arresting officer or arresting person is mandated to ensure that that person is presented before court of law. And even before you are presented before a court of law, you are supposed to be given what is called now the police cash bail or police bond. And even when you are being arrested, the person arresting you must inform you of your legal or your constitutional rights. Number one, he must inform you that you have a right to access to an advocate.
Right.
Number two, you have a right to access to cash bail or cash or bond. So those are the parameters under which an arresting officer ought to apply. So
these must clearly be stated when an officer approaches a person.
Exactly.
To arrest them.
Exactly. You must be stated. In fact, that's why you normally see even in movies say that whatever you may say may
be used against you.
And you're being arrested for A, B, C, D. So that you know as the reason as to why you are being arrested, because you know here it's a very fundamental right that is being curtailed, the right to liberty. So if a person curtails your right to liberty, he must be justified as to the reasons why he's doing so. So the Constitution, in as much as it recognizes that there are situations under which a person might be arrested, then those constitutional requirements must be met. So you're supposed to be presented at least 24 hours before the expiry of 24 hours. If you are not presented before the expiry of 24 hours, then there must be a very good reason by the arresting officer why he or she has not done so. So in the instance case that we just pointed out of Babu Owino Mheshimiwa being arrested, I think it's very unfortunate. First of all, I understand he was arrested in somewhere I think it was in Kirinyaga. Right. And then he had to be transported back to Nairobi. Yeah. You see, there was a whole circus. Yet in Kirinyaga or wherever he was, there are court of laws. He could have been presented there, and then maybe the court could have directed otherwise. But now, there seems, if there are legitimate reasons to hold you past the 24 hours, then those reasons must be legitimate, as I'm saying. They must be necessary. And also, they must be categorically stated as to why they are holding you. Normally, or the normal procedure is that when you arrest a person and there are many reasons as to why you want to retain that person to detain that person for quite a longer time, you have to go and seek leave before court and give reasons as to why this person is not safe to be released.
Right.
So there are those metrics that must be met, and there are those conditions that must be met.
So
Yes.
in this case,
Yeah.
Babu Owino was arrested
Yes.
on Tuesday night.
Yes.
And now more than 24 hours
Yes.
is when he's been arraigned in court.
Yes.
So this is not constitutional. So who's to blame if you're arraigned in court past the 24 hours as is required by law?
It is the inspectorate of the police, because it is the police that arrests individuals. So, Honorable Babu Owino
Right.
can have his recourse. He can institute a constitutional petition stating that his rights were infringed, and then the court, of course, will weigh and will look at what were the reasons why he was being held for that long.
Right.
But I understand the court has extended for him to be detained.
Right.
I understand he's sick or something of the sort. He has been told to go to the hospital, and the other co-accused or co-suspect is being remanded at Kilimani.
Yes.
So that is the right procedure, where the court has now pronounced that for him to be held until the following day, then I believe that the court assessed the situation and it found reason as to why you should be continued to be held at the police station.
Okay, and
Yes.
let's talk about the nature of arrests in the country, and especially in the political sphere. So that we hear police officers, that is what we report. Sometimes we put allegedly, because again, it's neither here nor there, to an unknown destination is where they've taken a specific person. So the arrests have been, very dynamic and without any particular order, if I may say so.
Thank you very much. At the moment, we are experiencing arrests that you could describe them as arbitrary. I would like to go back to that example of Honorable Babu Owino.
Right.
This is a leader who is an elected leader, and this is a person who is of authority in terms of the representatives that he represents. And therefore, even the manner in which you arrest such an individual, he was arrested at the airport, and we saw clips about him being shoved around in the presence of also other advocates who were there to try and protect them. And it is really unfortunate that we could also hear the honorable members saying loudly that, can you tell me why you are arresting me? And unfortunately, the officers were not responding.
Right.
They huddled him into a police cells, and that's where then they did not disclose where they placed him. We also saw clips about how horrified his members of family were running around the country, police station to police station, trying to find out where their member of family is. Now, just by that, you could see that there is a lot of rights that have been breached to that point. And it calls upon the National Police Service to really rethink again about whether they are adhering to their service standing orders or the National Police Service Act, or even our Constitution, which is the supreme law. And that is also one example of the Member of Parliament. Look at how journalists were arrested when they were covering this demonstration. Right. Look at how human rights defenders were also arrested. You're holded up, you're treated in a manner that is very cruel and degrading. Some are beaten in the process, and their gadgets also damaged. And I can tell you for a fact that through such incidences, the World Press Freedom Index has now rated Kenya at 116, a significant drop. Yes. From 69 last year. So such acts really damage the image of our country and damage the perception of the public about the national police in how they have trust within them, and also the need for police to now come out and adhere to the guidelines that have set out. And if they breach if people who are to enforce the law are the ones breaching the law, then what does that say to other persons who are watching? What does that say to our children? What does that say to any other well-wisher or a bystander? Then it really pricks the conscience, and it should be of concern to all of us that if we could see leaders huddled up in the same manner that we saw in the past, for example, the Miguna, it looked like
Right.
of such a setting. Then it's setting a worrying precedent and a trend that today it is him, tomorrow it could be me. We've also seen people who are holding placards or just speaking, airing out their views in the street, then they are huddled up because of expressing themselves. What does that say about the right to expression? It creates fear. Now I am afraid that we could be sitting here and then unknown individuals who do not even identify themselves would just come and pick us up and say, what were you trying to say?
Right.
So that really goes against the very, very nature of why we had this constitution and why we had a very strong and robust Bill of Rights.
Right. But again, this is not the first time
Yeah.
that the police service has been under scrutiny.
Yeah.
So what we really want to look at, who's to take responsibility for that? Because then if they act unlawful, then it goes unpunished. Then nothing is really done about it. Then it keeps going on. So then what is the purpose of a constitution and those rights enshrined in that constitution?
Exactly. So number one is that the constitution has come up as set up institutions that looks for accountability when we have such kind of mischief or we have such kind of misbehavior from our national police service or from people from other people who have who do not adhere to the constitution. Number one is that we have the IPOA, who are supposed to oversight the police.
Right.
So whenever a member of the public has an issue with a certain individual, with a certain police officer, there's a mechanism provided for under the constitution, which is now the IPOA, whereby you report. There are commissioners there, you report, and they do a very, very good job. They have a report. You can go to their website and see how you lodge a complaint there. Also, the constitution has created constitutional commissions, like my very good friend here comes from the Kenya National Human Rights Commission,
Right.
whereby they have been given observer status, whereby they are supposed to monitor such kind of outcries that come from the public where there's misuse or overbroad approach when it comes to police brutality and
Right.
so on and so forth. So the constitution has set up mechanisms. There's also, I think, inside the police stations, inside the police itself, there are internal mechanisms to report complaints, and then the police will take over from there. But due to the conflict of interest that normally is there, where you report your fellow police officer, and then it's like they are covering for
Right.
each other. Then the constitution now created the IPOA as one of the oversight authorities, so that it can check what the actions of the National Police Service.
Right.
So to that extent, there's also the judiciary, an arm of the government that you can lodge a complaint, and of course then whenever your rights are being infringed by a certain police officer, you can go to a constitutional court and you can seek redress from the constitutional courts.
Right. And the demonstrations
Yes.
that are happening across different counties,
Yes.
then the rights of protesting, picketing
Yes.
are in the Constitution. But does the Constitution really define the way in which protests should be carried out?
Yeah. So what the Constitution did under Article 37, I believe so,
Right.
is that it set out the freedom for demonstration and picketing, and then there's an Act of Parliament that operationalizes that kind of that right, which is now the Public Order Act. So the Public Order Act has given a spectrum on how now you are supposed to conduct your demonstration, or when you are picketing, or when you're presenting your petitions.
Right.
And it has given a broad, some of them are direct or indirect responsibilities to different people who are organizing demonstrators. So the organizer has the organizers of the demonstration have their own responsibilities, the demonstrators themselves have their own responsibilities, and the government, as the police, of course, also have their own responsibilities. For instance, the government is supposed to facilitate for the security of those who are demonstrating. Remember, when you're demonstrating does not mean that maybe you are carrying a popular opinion. So sometimes you can be a subject to attack.
Right.
So the securities operators who are there, or the personnel who are there, are supposed to guard the safety of those who are protesting. Number two, the protesters are also obliged to ensure that they do not infringe on other people's right whenever they are also demonstrating. They are not supposed to attack people, they are not supposed to throw stones, and they are not. So when there is an incident where a protester is throwing stone, it is the role of the police officers now to separate peacefully between those who are generally demonstrating and those who are being who are causing mayhem.
Okay.
The organizers also have a responsibility. You are supposed to provide leadership to the people that you are demonstrating with. So if you say that today we are demonstrating from Kawangware to Nairobi, or from Langata to Harambee House, then the leader is supposed to be there to facilitate them, to guide them through the way. So those are the responsibilities that are provided for. So the Constitution might not be that explicit, but we have other enabling clauses of the laws, like the public order, where you are supposed to give notice so that the government or the police can make arrangements to facilitate your demonstration.
Right.
Yes, that was the intention and the purpose of Article 37 of the Constitution.
Right. And RUTO, Kichumba did say that they're supposed to be separated peacefully. And of course, excessive force has been witnessed as well by the international organizations, and even the UN has blasted the police for excessive force. But when the protesters are throwing stones at police, what level of defense, how should they peacefully stop that?
Thank you. To answer your question, I would start referring to that Article 37.
Right.
There are some ingredients there that describes it. You have the right to peacefully and unarmed.
Right.
So that to demonstrate and now to picket. And so to that protester who is holding a stone or throwing stones, lighting fires, blocking roads, even breaking into shops and looting, then they are going against the constitutional provisions, because that is not peaceful, and that the holding and hurling of stones and even using other weapons, those are now the things that the Constitution prohibits. Now, for the police, how they conduct, there are guidelines that have been set out that even stem from the international law and even regional provisions that now have informed how we came up with even Article 37. They are actually borrowed from these international instruments.
Right.
So the guidelines are that for police, when dealing with demonstrators, first of all, is to use non-violent means. When that is failing, then they are to use force. That force has also categories in which it should be applied. For example, there is an issue around, is it necessary? 2, is it commensurate with the response that you're dealing with? Is it justifiable?
Right. In
the sense that the demonstrators, for instance, are now hurling stones. Then the officer would ask themselves, is it now the time to use whatever force? And we also, it's another question about how we are equipping our officers. Are they adequately equipped to use that force? We've seen officers would chase them and hit their shields, and they would see them run.
Right.
But in these demonstrations, we've seen unclothed individuals in plain uniform coming in with Subarus that are in very high speed, then entering into slum areas. And then we hear of gunshots. Then the aftermath is we see children who've been shot. We see people we've seen people masquerading as journalists and then purporting to arrest. But even the own act of the police and the service standing order says that an officer who is in plain clothes while on duty must wear a badge and identify themselves. That is not happening. It also says that the use of firearms should be as a last resort, and it's not supposed to go out and kill the individual, but we are seeing shots that are targeted to the head, targeted to the chest, and that has now led to the loss of life. We've also seen children here in nearby Kihumbini Primary School tear gassed. And so it makes an individual ask themselves, why is it that the police are not conducting themselves in accordance to their operation orders?
Right.
Why are they not following the law that has been set out? Then why are they using excessive force? There are ways in which you can be able to quell demonstrations. We've seen counter demonstrations.
But don't you think that then the police will say in their defense they will use the gun because they were stones? You know, people are using slings and stones, which could be said to be maybe an equivalent, or perhaps, because there's a very thin line.
Indeed, the thin line is this. Whenever you are to use a firearm, it should be as a last resort.
Right.
When you're defending life, when the threat of the officer, the imminent threat to the life of the officer is at hand, the death of his other colleagues and also any other person, and for persons when in the process of trying to protect property. But the videos that we are seeing through the media coverage that has been happening, by the way, the journalists usually are standing on the side of the police, save for a few who have the courage to sit with the demonstrators.
Right.
We've seen people throwing stones. Then we see in response, officers aiming at using heavy firearms such as an AK-47 and aiming at the protesters and shooting. There is that before an officer should use their firearm, they are supposed to issue out a warning that they are about to use. But even when they are not, they ought to use a warning shot. But even in terms of the warning shot, it should be in such a way that it shouldn't injure a person, or in the residential areas that people living in the balconies should not be harmed in the process.
Right.
And even when such injuries occur, it is the responsibility of the officer to ensure that these persons are given medical treatment, at least for these demonstrations. Yesterday we saw people from the Red Cross and MSF coming in to assist, which is something progressive. The officers also need to notify not only the family members or their friends of the persons who are injured, but also the Independent Policing Oversight Authority,
right.
Something that hasn't been happening. And it is shocking that as at yesterday, when the cabinet secretary was issuing out his statement, he mentioned only about the disruption of property and the arrests that they did make. There was no statement about the persons who are injured. There was no statement about the people who are killed.
Those numbers.
To date, those numbers are not verified, and it will take some time for further investigations to be conducted, but yet this is a requirement in law that whenever any person dies, it is the duty of the police officers who are during that operation to report back to their seniors, and also the failure to do so subjects them to disciplinary action.
Right.
Unfortunately, we are not seeing that. We are yet to see the prosecutions coming after demonstrations. What we are seeing is the prosecution of the protesters. We are not seeing the prosecution of the police officers who use excessive force. And
right.
It is about time that agencies that are monitoring, such as ourselves and IPOA, actually, and also the IAU, take up these matters and work closely with the DPP to ensure that if the officers who are commanding and also who are conducting these operations are brought to book whenever they breach the law, and they should be also individual culpability and command responsibility, so that when we see operations that are systemic and widespread, that are coordinated, then they amount to ingredients that may lead to international crimes.
Right. And now that you talked about individual responsibility, we know in the post-election violence 2007, 2008, then there was a commanding officer who was among the people who were taken to the International Court of Justice over the same. So people can actually take individual responsibility over that. But just to change gears just a bit, then there has been a lot of blame game that the protesters are hurling stones at police officers, or police officers just come in and start throwing tear gas. So what is the responsibility of the state And when you look at this, how do you demystify and say it was the protesters' fault, they started hurling stones, or it was the police fault because they came in and perhaps started shooting aimlessly or something?
Yeah, the state bears the greatest responsibility because the right to protect and safeguard individual and the property, specifically, that's a responsibility in as much as people having the individual responsibility to do so, is vested to the state through the different agencies. So when it comes to the issue of blame game, we like to, the Constitution, of course, under Article 24 also give a limitation to rights, as he has rightly pointed out. But the question that we need to ask ourselves is the question of what we call the question of the way you said necessity. When you're employing such kind of force, is it necessary for you as a police officer to throw back a stone, or to also to throw that tear gas canister, or also to shoot that bullet? Number two is the proportionality. This is a protester who does not have a machine gun like you. They don't have any protective. And number two, a police officer has gone for a training. These are people who are trained. They know how to manage their emotions. They know how to manage a crowd whenever there is such kind of a thing. So a greater responsibility will go to the state. And whenever there's employment of any force, it must be directly proportional to the other force that is coming from the other side. For instance, I saw yesterday whereby they were saying where people were throwing stones and then they were covering themselves using some kind of a tang or a plastic somewhere in Mathare.
Right.
Yes, I could see the police, of course, trying to throw the tear gas so that they could be dispersed and take away that tool, so that at the end of the day, they do not misuse that object to shield themselves here they are aiming at the police. And again, number two is when you are dispersing these people, you should do it humanly, because the aspect of humanity or of humanity must be at place in any time when you're engaging certain people. You cannot, like the person who was hit at the head, you know, by an object that came from the side of the police.
Right.
And you see, because in these instances, it's rarely do you find, of course, police are normally injured, but chances are very minimal compared to when individuals are injured, because the nature of demonstrations are very emotional. These are people who are complaining about the high cost of living. You know, they are bitter. Their day has just been wasted. So they are really agitated as compared to the police who are in their line of duty.
Right.
So for me, or from the perspective of the law, the state will most certainly bear the greatest responsibility when it comes to containing demonstrators who come armed.
Right.
Yes.
And of course, the police service has come under scrutiny. Many people saying they have been oriented in violence. And that is the kind of orientation that before they got into into office.
Yes.
But as well, for the anti-riot police, they made complaints about the working conditions and saying that they were feeling fatigued. And that was last week, after last week's demonstrations, now ahead of these 3-day protests by the Azimio Brigade. So again, are the police, are their rights respected?
I thank you very much for that question. Now, to the officers, I really feel for them, because the nature in which the circumstances and environment that they are put is that they are the ones who are to ensure that they face danger so that you and I enjoy peace. And that we have to give credit to the National Police Service for the work that they are doing in terms of maintenance of peace. Now, for officers to effectively carry out or police demonstrations is that they need the necessary equipment. When you see statements coming from officers, either via social media or through official statements indicating that there is fatigue, there is issues around their psyche, even the equipment is insufficient, they are running out, then it calls upon to question the necessary resources that they are required to quell demonstrations, brings it into question, how are we equipping them? How are we also as a country facilitating the operations of the National Police? Because we do have other disciplined forces who usually come together to support the National Police Service. And when they do come, they must all be under the directive of the Inspector General. And then secondly, they also ought to be trained and briefed before now going out. Even the gear that they wear should be should enable them deal with any impending danger. For example, the kind of attire. But even when they do so, they should be in a position to put their badge numbers so that they can be identified. It's sad that at times you find officers commanding stations are just told that go support these officers and then deploy officers, only for them to find themselves ill-equipped. And in such instances, we've seen officers suffer, had to retreat, especially when either their tear gas runs out, because they know that when they start using firearms, then the glare of the media is there, they might face responsibilities. So to some extent, when you see, it is really disheartening when you see officers running back into their vehicles.
That was quite a scene.
Yes, and then they are being chased after. And also there are few who've been caught in the melee and have really suffered a lot of injuries. And thank God we haven't seen any report of any death. And so it brings to question, if the kind of officers that we are sending there, are they equipped enough? Because even the numbers that they are going to deal with, if you deploy, say, 15 officers against to a population of, say, 300,000, then what are you saying in terms of the machinery and the equipment that goes to quell such demonstrations? So at the end of the day, it goes back to the state. And we are happy because this government was the first to say that the National Police Service will have their own independent funding. So we want to see that funding now translating into better equipment and better services and even conditions for officers in terms of their psychological well-being and even their general welfare, even as they continue to police our country.
So we do have to close, but I'd like to pick your final sentiments, because the protests are here. There's no saying when it's going to stop. And even if it stops now, this is a democracy. We could always have other protests, not just from the opposition, but any other nature of protest. So moving forward, how do we make it safe and ensure that people are enjoying their rights?
Yes, number one, how to make it safe, I'd say that the observance of the rule of law. Because currently, the situation that we are in is a very dire one. Remember, the court issued orders saying that the finance bill as it is right now should not be operationalized. But we saw that the EPRAs went ahead and increased the cost of fuel and so on and so forth. So that one really agitates people and people get hungry. So number two is also government to listen to the cry of the people. People are demonstrating for a reason, the high cost of living. It is time that the government should now listen to the people, should take a retreat, go back to the drawing board and see how they are going to mitigate the issue of the cost of living. Number three is that we need to have dialogue. Politicians should stop taking hard stance. You know, the leader of opposition, the former prime minister, His Excellency the President, and the people who surround them need to come together, come with a consensus, be it in parliament or whatever form. So that they can have discussion and to forge a way forward. Because at the end of the day, we only have one nation and we all belong to this nation. Number three is that leaders cut across from all spectra of the society, be it religious leaders, youth leaders, village elders, and so on and so forth, should come down, sit down, come up with a mechanism on which they can mitigate the issues that are ailing our society each and every day. With that, I think
We'll be at a better place.
Exactly.
Yes, we're talking very few words because we're literally being chased out.
Okay, thank you. To me, I would say that the country is now moving towards where would the brink of the precipice, and it is important that it pricks our conscience and concerns us all that we still need a country. When lives are lost and lots of injuries, loss of property, loss of business,
right,
and even curtailing freedom of movement because of these impending threats that are associated with the demonstrations, then it calls upon us again to rethink again of what strategies we are doing or we employing to now seek addressing the issues that we want to pursue.
Okay.
First of all, I would state that the state should enable protesters to conduct their protests peacefully. When a state representatives outrightly call out and say that there will be no more demonstrations, such a statement goes against the Constitution by itself.
Okay.
And when the state prevents people from just moving out of their estate, even when they are peaceful, then it goes against, again, the values, and it leads to more strife and more incidences of conflict. And so it calls upon us to know that when the rule of law is broken, then it opens up the country to anarchy. And it calls upon us to dialogue, as my colleague has mentioned, and for sobriety, to know that there has to be other means of addressing grievances. And we already have the legal process that is ongoing. We had the stalled parliament negotiations. And so the leaders from both divides need to put the interest of this country first.
Right. Okay.
And as opposed to now the hard stance and the sectarian interests.
It's no competition.
So, yes, and again, okay, I would call for the respect for human rights for all at all times.
Right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Now this is an ending conversation because human rights, we're all human, so there are rights. We need these rights. Yes. And thank you so much, Elijah Rotok, human rights advocate from KNCHR, and Kipchumba, your SOC advocate. Thank you for being part of this conversation, and thank you for also taking your time to engage with us and across all the social media platforms at Lookuptv on Twitter, Lookuptv on Facebook, Lookuptv on our YouTube channel. Tonight, legally speaking, we have been talking about the demonstrations, police brutality and human rights, the rights to picket, and of course the responsibility of police officers and the state as well during protest. Because it's the day 2 of the demonstrations, we'll be looking to see how tomorrow goes. Keep it right here on Lookuptv, and of course to catch the latest of the updates, www.lookuptv.co.ke. I'm Nancy Nalima. Appreciate you for watching. Our sign language interpreter has been Felista Adundo. Have yourselves a pleasant evening and good night.
We value your feedback and welcome your complaints about our programming.